A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to Nerf Secrets Revealed Aftersought. And so now, let's get on to one that's been featured in Bolts of Intrigue. This is the rival Helios. One of the blasters that I had managed to find on the set of the film itself. Of course, the rest of the whole project hasn't really been finished yet, and I still got lots to work on with part 2 of Bolts of Intrigue, so it's still an incomplete project. But by far, Helios was one of the blasters that have been featured in the film itself, and does work in similar ways to how some other real-life blasters would be. Just has itself a simple cocking mechanism on the side, which helps to distinguish this one from quite a few other blasters in general. Of course, I also have this one equipped with a clip storage, so that way you could store an extra on the top. Generally, I use the 7-round magazine with this one, just so it's easier to handle, and more importantly, so that way I can allow for more blasters to fit on it in the wall, because one of those 12-round magazines are much longer, at least this long, so that's a little more than a foot worth of magazine right there. It's not as bad as, well, the dart magazines, where 18 dart magazines in general, they can also be of a similar length, but of course this is pretty much no exception. So basically that's why I just use this in general. Although what I can say for sure about this one is that, well, it works much like a typical firearm in many ways, because its bolt on the side is actually very peculiar to some of those that I've talked about earlier, where they tend to have a bit of bolt action on the side, and as such they happen to, well, have the sort of gimmick or feel to that of a real firearm. And I will say that, well, for the sounds it makes, it's not really as loud as some of the others I've talked about, like the Atlas. I mean, that big tank of a shotgun that fires 2 rounds at a time, that thing is so loud. I mean, you have no clue unless you had it yourself. But what I can say for sure is that, well, it's got a jam door, for sure, and it's not quite easy to get in, especially because, well, if you look here, it'll only open itself up, the chamber that is, when it's primed back, but it automatically slides forward for some reason. So it's not like many other priming mechanisms, though we have started to get some that do automatically thrust back to where they are. The Maverick Strong Arm, as well as a couple other blasters I have, they also happen to have this kind of, well, auto-retracting priming mechanism sort of phenomenon. However, let's go ahead and try a little something different. Because if you've seen the first time I used this blaster in the film with invisibullets, then, well, yeah, that kind of just goes to show. The film can tell us how these blasters act up, and so, compared to real life, it's pretty much no exception. But what I can gauge out of the Helios' performance pretty much is that, well, its FPS ranges are a bit high, so you might want to be careful when using these out there on the battlefield. So it's not the highest by far, because some of the Ultra blasters have actually managed to tackle some rivals-based performance with FPS ranges and whatnot. But I will say for sure that magazine release is also pretty good, and it also has a safety lever over here right alongside the trigger, so That's some pretty easy access right there. And as for jam clearance, well, it's back here though, for some odd reason. Of course, just about everything on here is pretty good to go, but I can't really say much entirely about the Helios in terms of, well, how else it tends to go, because other than the fact that, well, there's a priming indicator also towards the stock, just like with the jam button over here. Of course, it does give you a pretty vague sort of hint about whether or not it's primed, because yeah, it just doesn't really have plastic that sits close to the hole. Instead, you'd have to look in very closely to be able to find out whether or not it's primed, because let me demonstrate. You probably could see that, right? I mean, that's only because I was holding the blaster up close to the lens, so whether or not, if it's meant to be accurate or what, I guess it's all up to you. It's somewhat average, in all honesties, but I'd say it's a pretty good blaster for what it is compared to many others I've talked about, because, yeah, the Atlas, which is also a rival blaster, does have some merits that probably aren't worthy of most collectors out there. It's very, very bulky size compared to this is not at all that good. I mean, it's not that heavy though, so that's probably one thing I could get out of the way early. It fires 2 rounds at a time, so you might want to be careful with how many rounds you use at a time. You might want to be sparing with those, but here it only fires 1 at a time, so here's one rival blaster that doesn't buckshot more than 1 round like that. In conclusion, the Helios, my personal rating, because it's somewhat average in a ways, it does get itself a rating of around maybe 6.9 out of 10, 7.0 at most. Because after all, auto-retracting priming like that, it's not really that necessary actually, because after all, how would you be able to tell when to clear out a jam? Because if it auto-retracts like that, then well, while you have the jam door open, then well, it could probably be a little difficult to try and gauge whether or not you're able to clear the jam out or whatnot. Because after all, the breech after all automatically shuts itself back up when the prime is in the forward position again after being in the back end like this. Yeah, see what I mean? So, that's kind of something that sort of hurts its overall point level compared to some others out there. I've given pretty good ratings to most blasters out there, but for some, they're not so lucky. Like the Megalodon. And, yeah. I'm probably going to be referring back to the Megalodon because it is by far one of the worst blasters I've ever had. The irony of even talking about here, so yeah, I'm kind of on the same level as James Rolfe and E.T. on Atari 2600 right now. Yeah, I said that, but just a simple comparison can go a long way. Well, anyways, that's pretty much it that I got to talk about for this blaster in particular. Though, let's be wary, because I'll be having a lot more to talk about when it comes to Rivals blasters later on. But until then, if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.